Now we're talking to Ken Kilbride, who is the CEO of ADHD Ireland. And we'll find out what ADHD is and what it does. Firstly, you're very welcome to Disability Matters.
Well, thanks, John. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here today and have a chat to your listeners.
It's great, and it's great to talk to you again because I know we had you on before. You might start, if you will, by telling us and telling our listeners what ADHD is and also a bit about the symptoms.
So, ADHD is what we call a neurodevelopmental condition. So, it's a condition that people are born with, and it's primarily genetic, i.e., it tends to run through families. It's not something that you acquire through life. So there is certainly an awful lot more talk about ADHD. And recently, the CSO, the Central Statistics Office, produced some surveys, about a month ago, saying that about 2% of the population were diagnosed with ADHD, and 9% of adults thought they might have ADHD. Now that's a very, very high percentage. It's probably more about 5%. So there is an awful lot of people out there who think they have ADHD but may not. They may have a lot of the symptoms. So again, ADHD is something I say you're born with, and affects you through your lifespan. You don't actually pick it up, if I can use that term. So in terms of the acronym, so it stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. So within that, there's three main behaviours. Now we've moved away from looking at the behaviours as a way to describe the condition. We now look more at the neural pathways. But talking about the behaviours is a good shorthand way of describing the condition. So the first one is around attention deficit, which is the AD. Now, just to say, it's not attention deficit per se. What we're talking about here is the inability to maintain attention is the key driver. So when someone with ADHD is engaged in a task and does find it interesting, they can maintain their focus and concentration on the task. So it's for what we call low impact tasks and things like that as well. Okay. So what you say for people with ADHD, if it's unimportant, it's difficult to focus on. Where it's important, it can be easy enough to focus on. So it's usually around the level of engagement of the task, or the level of enjoyment, engagement, things like that as well. So then there's what we call executive function challenge, which is the impulsivity. And so basically, all of us have a regulator in our brain. That little voice that goes, that's a good idea, that's not a bad idea, we'll do that, we won't do that. So it controls everything, regulates everything. For people with ADHD, they don't have that executive function. So all the lights are green. So the thought comes into their brain, they go straight on it. And so there's no actually consideration on it, where this is a good idea, bad idea. All the lights are green, everything's green for go all the time. And then there's what's called the hyperactivity, which is on the go, driven by a motor all the time. Now there is sort of what called subtypes. So you can have, just the attention deficit and have ADHD. You can have the impulsivity to hyperactivity and still have ADHD, no challenge with the other. But generally, the vast majority of people with the condition will have what's called the combined. So they'll have equal amounts of attention deficit, hyperactivity and impulsivity. Now what you need to say is that, to get the diagnosis, you need to have it at a level where it's what we would say in an impairment or a challenge in your life. We all forget our keys. We all forget to, left things behind. That's not ADHD. It's when, you say, not that you forgot your car keys, you can't find your car. You do have money in your account, but you forgot to pay the bills. And these are the type of things, forgive me, but, this is one thing that can come up when we're talking to clinicians. People with ADHD don't always turn up for their appointment to get their assessment because they forgot.
Yeah.
So it's when it's a challenge in your life, then you can get the assessment. So you usually, I say, it's a combination of attention deficit, hyperactivity, and impulsivity, and it's a challenge in your life.
So before the term ADHD was put down on paper, they're considered bold boys or bold girls, were they?
Yeah, the naughty child, the thing like that, the naughty child syndrome is the term I always use. But there's lots of examples in literature throughout history, going back thousands of years, describing people with ADHD, not necessarily using the same term. And that goes back to the point, we talk about the ADHD being genetic. And so again, it's always part of humanity. And the reason we would say that is, that one of the things you find is, with that lack of impulsivity, that people with ADHD tend to be what we would call the game changers. And so again, someone says, we're in the valley. What's on the other side of the mountain? And the person goes, I'll go and have a look at it. Again, things like that as well. 50,000 years ago when you're walking across the savannas in Africa, having a mind that was able to focus on three or four different things at one time was actually quite important. What was that crack at the branch? Was that a line?
Yeah.
What was that dapple in, the thing? Was there something moving there? When we started building, settlements and putting walls around places, and you didn't have to worry about that line coming to get you, you could sit down and focus what's in front of you. But up till then, having ADHD was actually quite important.
Yeah.
And it helped people survive. Now, obviously, just how that you see it in society today, because there is strength that goes with the conditions as well. So you see, particularly the creative industries, you know, um, dancers, comedians, singers, actors, graphic designers, computer designers, all those type of industries. ADHD tends to be the fuel in those industries. Entrepreneurships. Um, the amount of entrepreneurs that you will meet that actually have ADHD as well, because they just think of the idea and then go, I'll go do it. Now
And
the rest of us
people
go,
people tend to see it as a child's disease, but ADHD or children with ADHD become adults with ADHD.
oh, that's it, yeah.
Yeah.
So basically what we would talk about there, we say the prevalence rate for children in Ireland is about 5%. So 5% of all children in Ireland probably have ADHD. Now we haven't tested them all, but that's what we would estimate in terms of the figures. And we would say that 3% of adults go on to have ADHD impacting across the lifespan. So that gives you 160, 170,000 adults in Ireland today. So an awful lot. Now, what has happened there? We said 5% of adults, 3% of 5% of children, 3% of adults. What happened to that 2%, which is 40% of the children? Um, they've done things that they've learned to manage their ADHD. They still have ADHD. They just learned to manage it so they're no longer meeting what we would call the clinical criteria if
Yeah.
they went to get the assessment. So again, you're looking at 5% of the population in Ireland probably have ADHD, whether they get the assessment or not.
And he said 3% of children. Is there a gender split?
No.
Does it favour girls or boys?
No. What it does do is that because it's genetic, it tends to be 50% boys,
Right.
50% girls, but it presents differently. So boys tend to have more what we call the hyperactivity, and there's an old saying, girls internalize, boys externalize.
Yeah.
And so the boys who externalize their ADHD, they're the ones in the classroom the teacher can see. So what you find there is that that the prime age for getting an assessment for children with ADHD is the ages of 8 to 12. But in that age range, you're seeing 4 to 5 times more boys than girls get the assessment. And that's because the boys are bouncing around the classroom, talking all the time, not being quiet. Teacher can see that. Girls tend to have more the inattentive ADHD. So they're sitting down the back of the class, they're being quiet, they're being dreamy, and they're not causing a problem. So they're not being picked up. But that sort of masking, social camouflaging can cause problems around anxiety and depression, particularly when they start going through puberty, 13, 14, 15.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we'd say just, if you ever have seen a girl going through a clinical setting for, anxiety and depression, we'd say also check for ADHD.
Okay. And then, is it a standalone condition or can you have other conditions with it?
Oh, this is one of the areas that that the whole sector is going through at the moment.
Yeah.
And so again, what we've always said is that ADHD is a condition that rarely travels alone.
Okay.
And so just in terms of figures, so about 70 to 80% of people with ADHD will have one other condition, 30 to 35 will have two other conditions, and 10 to 15% will have three other conditions. And so those conditions primarily tend to be, there's a big range, but primarily we're talking about autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia.
Wow.
And you never know what the mix is till you get the assessment done. It could be ADHD with autism, it could be ADHD dyslexia. Now, just to say in terms of that, you may not have the other what's called comorbid or coexisting condition at what we call an assessment or clinical level. You may have lots of traits of it as well. So
Good.
you might have ADHD with lots of traits of autism rather than having diagnosis of autism. Same for dyslexia, dyspraxia.
And tell me about the diagnosis then. What's that like?
So again, one of the things about ADHD, and compare it to something like depression, and you can't cut someone's skull open, look inside
Yeah,
the brain, and go,
yeah,
"There's ADHD." Much as you can't do that with depression either. So assessment is done by what we would call clinical observation. So just the prime example you'd use for that is something like children. And so what you do is you have to show that ADHD impacts them across their lifespan. And so what we need to do is show it's happening 2 out of 3 environments. And so when the clinician is doing the assessment, they'll assess the child themselves. And they'll also ask the parents to do an assessment of the child, and they'll also ask the school. So you're able to look at because what you find is, particularly for girls, because of that social masking, social camouflaging, the teacher doesn't see it.
mm,
And so again, they go, yep, great in class, wonderful in class, great child to have in my class. And parents, as they come home, it all gets released at the end of the day,
yeah.
and the Coke bottle effect explodes. The clinician sees it as well. So you've seen it 2 out of 3 environments is what needs to get assessment, and it's the same for adults in terms of it's around observation. Out 2 out of 3 in work environments.
So that must take a little bit of time.
Yes, it does take a lot. It can take time to do an assessment. Certainly, an assessment should take half a day, if not longer,
I get you.
in terms of getting it done.
And then what about treatment?
So generally, there's something called what's called the NICE guidelines.
Right.
So NICE is the National Institute for Clinical Health and Excellence. It's an organisation in the UK that provides information on assessing and treating conditions for the NHS. Now, we don't have a similar body here, so clinicians in Ireland tend to follow what's called the NICE guidelines.
Right.
And so what we would always say in that for both children and adults, the non-medical management of ADHD is usually the frontline treatment. So that's, behavioural management, speech and language therapy, OT, things like that. And, the psychosocial supports that ADHD Ireland provides, the support groups, the awareness talks, the webinars, things like that as well, the parental training courses, the adult training courses as well. But what you find is you're not getting a result from them. Well, then it's usually a combination of medication and the non-medical management of ADHD.
Okay.
So
I
those
get
two
you.
together are needed combined. Medication by itself will never solve ADHD.
And it's the easy way is to give medication and leave it at that. So,
It's very challenging. It is in Ireland at the moment. There is a lack of clinicians, and so again, if people are looking to get and try the medication, see if it works for them, there's a long list to get on, to get it.
all right. And then if we move on then to ADHD Ireland, when was that founded?
So that was founded back in the early 80s, actually. And so again, what was happening there was, some parents came together and they found there was no support awareness for their children. And so they started forming a loose association. It became sort of a more formal association in 1985. And it's been gone through a couple of changes, name changes ever since. And in 2019 we officially became an incorporated organisation with the name ADHD Ireland. So around a long time.
Very good. And what service do you provide?
So again, we're primarily funded through the HSE, so which we're called Section 39. So we're funded by the HSE, but we work for ADHD Ireland. So we're that one step removed. So the basic principle or partnership and how we work with the HSE is that they will do the assessment and treatment, i.e. the medical side of ADHD.
Right.
We do what's called the psychosocial supports. And so again, we do, support groups. We do support groups for parents. We do support group for adults. We parental training courses, for, helping and supporting your child with ADHD. We have a self-management course for adults with ADHD as well, which is flying out. And, people are saying this is the best thing they've ever done. And, we have a conference coming up in October for, parents, and another section for adults. We have an app for adults, which has 40,000 downloads. So there's an
Wow.
awful lot of supports out there and things like that. And just if you give me, take an example, our website will get about 250, 300,000 visits this year. And so there is an
I'm
awful lot of
one.
people out there. There you go. Hope you enjoyed it.
I did actually. It's very full of information, which is would be a great comfort to me if I had a child with ADHD. It's important to include families, isn't it?
Oh God, yeah. So, as I was saying, because of that genetic element, and ADHD tends to run through families. And so again, just for example, if there was a child with ADHD, statistically, you might look at the parents, and it's not the parents, you're looking at the grandparents. It's not the grandparents, it's the aunties or uncles. And so what you do find is, it is very important to see how it is in families. And again, just for an example, another consideration on that is that, so what you find is that one parent might have ADHD, probably undiagnosed, and the other partner doesn't. And so again, like we will have a partner support group, for parents or for people that are in a relationship with an adult who does have ADHD.
Yeah.
And so again, there is those dynamics that go through families all the time. So yeah, we always work, as I say, with all parts, the child, the parents, and the adults within the family.
I was taking my UMAP.
Yes.
That seemed to be a very good program.
Well, again, so what we do is say we have this sort of what's called a tripartite arrangement with ourselves, the School of Psychology and UCD, and the HSE. So we have we come together, we call it Triad, we come up with a new name for it very recently, and we've been running this for 4 or 5 years. So what we've been doing is we've been trying to come up with examples or programs that we can run for adults with ADHD. So the first one we came up with was the app. So the basic idea is that the School of Psychology designed these programs, develop them. The HSE funds them. We deliver them. So the app I say is running. We got 40,000 downloads, but 160,000 adults. It's a very high percentage of people with the app here in Ireland and using that to help manage their lives. But UMAP is another one that we've done. So we've always had parental programs. And again, just going back to the NICE guidelines I mentioned earlier. So the front line mentioned in NICE guidelines for parents of children 5 to 12 with a child with ADHD is not medication, it's parental training.
Right.
So again, CAMS say, look, I mean, you're here, we're doing the assessment, really should go on a parenting course as well. And just to bear in mind, we would run them as well. There is a Parents Plus, Magic 123, incredible years out there as well. So we looked at that and said adults need something similar. So again, we would have sat down with UCD and the HSE and we designed this program called UMAP, which is the Understanding and Managing Adult ADHD program. Now, I'm not just saying this, because we do evaluate it, and we ask questions, how are you before it, how are you afterwards, how has it impacted your life? We go back 6 months later and ask them, see how is it having an impact still in their lives, things like that as well. So the research is coming back, telling that this works. But what's really, really, has been outstanding for me is anytime I would go to an event for adults with ADHD, the amount of people that come up unsolicited to me and say, I've just done UMAP and it's the best thing I've ever done in my life, has been absolutely amazing.
Brilliant. Tell us, do you fundraise? And if so, have you anything coming up?
As I say, we don't do a huge amount of fundraising. Going back to the point you were talking there about earlier about not saying necessarily in the perceptions of ADHD,
Yeah.
but there is still that view out there that ADHD is the naughty child and the bold child syndrome.
Yeah.
We have sort of the thought that if we were to go out and stand on the streets and shake a bucket for ADHD Ireland, we're not sure how well we do.
Okay.
So again, we're primarily funded through the HSE, as it says, the Section 39.
Very
Now
good.
we do fundraising. We get several thousand a year. We have membership. People pay for membership of ADHD Ireland. But say primarily we are funded through the HSE. About 85% of the funding comes. But we do, as I say, we do a big international conference every October, because October is ADHD Awareness Month.
Okay.
So again, like you said, we have the Parents Conference. So on the 2nd of October, we connecting with your child's mental health. Then we have a webinar supporting your child in school. That's been delivered by the National NCSE, which is a government body in terms of how designing supports in schools. We have a teachers, how do you meet the teacher, connecting with school supports. Paula Rav, who's a teacher who does have ADHD. We also have the role of guidance counsellors and things like that. And then we have our adult one coming up from the 13th. So how do you get an adult assessment? We talked about that earlier, but how do you go through that? We also have one on ADHD and eating disorders. And that's one of the new areas of research. We're doing that with Bodywise, who'll be one of the main charities in the area.
Okay. Yeah.
So again, this is one of the things, forgive me, but we talked about girls there going through anxiety and depression at the ages 13, 14, 15. But there's that huge overlap there between eating disorders and ADHD now as well.
Yeah.
So again, something else you need to look out for there. So we're having aware of that, because as adults, we toxic relations, gaslighting, and narcissism with definitely Stephanie Sarkis, who's the leading person in this area from the United States. And again, we've other webinars. So we have a full program coming up in October on people that can link into to get full supports and information on how they can support themselves and other people with ADHD.
And the very best to look at it. We're right at the end of our time now. Anything else you'd like to say before we go?
No, thanks very much for the opportunity. We always appreciate it. And if you want to have us back again sometime in the future, do let us know.
You know we will.
There you go.
Ken Kilbride, thank you so much for talking to us about Disability Matters.
Appreciate it.
Very good.